Well, that's the crime and cannabis link, but what's it doing to Māori health? Joining us on the line from Wellington is Professor Richard Beasley from the Medical Research Institute. And with me in the studio is Dr Vickie MacFarlane, a community health expert from the Waitemata District Health Board. Professor Beasley, if I could come to you first. Many Māori I talk to seem to think that cannabis is natural. It does no harm. In fact, it's better than tobacco. What would you say to that?
Well, I think there's really quite a lot of evidence now that regular cannabis smoking has major health problems. And I think the two that are particularly important to New Zealand are the risk of mental health disorders and also the risk of lung cancer with regular use.
Most Māori these days, even a lot of New Zealanders, consider cannabis to be a normal part of socialisation.
Well, I think that may be part of the problem, and it's become really part of the culture. But we need to recognise that cannabis smoking has similar risks to tobacco in terms of particularly the risks to the lung and lung cancer in particular. But as distinct from smoking tobacco, cannabis smoking really has very significant risk of mental health problems, to the extent that if you smoke cannabis on a regular basis, you at least double the risk of having a major mental health disorder that will seriously affect your life. And it appears that these risks particularly occur in younger people, and that the younger you smoke, the greater the risk. And I think one of the concerning trends we've noted in New Zealand over the last few decades is that communities are starting to smoke cannabis at a younger age, where the potential harm is considerably greater. For example, we found in our study on lung cancer that if you started smoking cannabis regularly before the age of 16, you're actually 10 times more likely to get lung cancer than if you started smoking in your 20s, and that's accommodating the actual same amount of smoking.
So in terms of government response to this, what needs to be done?
Well, I'm not in a position to advise the government as to what action they need to take, except to say that for many medical people, we're of the view that the very strong initiatives taken in public health to reduce smoking tobacco, that those initiatives should also spread in terms of smoking cannabis. And you mentioned earlier in the interview that there's a perception out there that cannabis is safe. Well, in fact, that's simply not the case. And I think that one of the important things the public health doctors could do is actually put information out there to advise people of the potential risks they might be having if they smoke cannabis on a regular basis.
One of the things that's been thrown up in our research is all the myths about dope smoking, like if you use a bong, it's not so harmful. What do you know about that?
Yes, well, I think it really does not make much difference how you smoke cannabis. There is some relative safety in terms of the lung effects if you actually take it orally as the non-combusted, the non-smoked product. But in terms of smoking cannabis, the risks are inherent in the nature of the smoke that you're inhaling. And these risks, in terms of sort of a very simple public health message for people who really want to consider, also try to size up the risks, we found that in terms of chronic bronchitis and emphysema, that one joint was equivalent to smoking about 5 tobacco cigarettes. And that's because people, when they smoke cannabis, they take a deeper breath, they hold it in for longer, it's hotter, the smoke, and you don't have a filter. And so you get greater deposition of the smoke within the lung. And that in terms of lung cancer risk, we found that one joint is equivalent to about 20 cigarettes in terms of risk. And that's for the same reasons as the risk of chronic bronchitis and emphysema, but also the fact that the carcinogenic compounds within cannabis smoke are at a higher concentration than within tobacco smoke. So I think that we need to get that message out there to people that, you know, that one cannabis joint is about the same as one packet of cigarettes in terms of lung cancer risk. And so then they can make the informed decision. And I think one of the concerns I have is that that information really has not been spread widely enough within the community to allow people to size up the risks when they make the decision as whether they want to go down this track.
Why do you think people aren't picking up on this message?
Well, I think it's a difficult issue because of the whole debate in terms of legalisation of cannabis. And I think that has made it very difficult for people to be objective and simply look at the evidence in terms of the health effects without necessarily being drawn into the debate of legalisation.
Thank you so much for joining us. After watching that, what worries you the most about Māori and cannabis use?
I think it's the extent that it's normalised in Māori society, and it's what concerns me is that Māori aren't accessing treatment or help for their cannabis, with the cannabis use.
Where you work, how do people actually come to you and ask for help? How do you see them?
People can walk in our walk-in clinics, and that's any time in the week. We have clinics available for youth specifically, and Māori and Pacific people. So, I mean, the access is freely available, but it's not. I don't think there's an awareness that it's there.
What do we actually know about the usage by Māori?
Well, I think that's we have a deficit. I mean, the last research I could find was in 1998, so that's more than 20 years ago, and it appeared that Māori smoke cannabis around about the same rates as the rest of New Zealand.
Well, that's really interesting. So there's no actual information out there that shows exactly who is smoking, how old they are and how often?
No.
Well, given that you work for a DHB, you know, what can you tell me? Why is that not being done yet?
I think it's the same reasons as what we've talked about. I think it's been under it's not recognised as being a health problem so much. The media, there's not a public awareness of the risks. And often cannabis is used in combination with other substances. And
this is the gateway drug?
Well, that's been a theory. I mean, there's different theories about that, but yeah, it's often used in combination with other drugs.
In Tahuri's story, there was a reference that Māori are using it to cope with the stresses of poverty. How do you stop that from happening?
Well, I guess lots of people use substances to cope with, difficulties in their lives, whether it's alcohol or cannabis. But the evidence would suggest that that's actually going to, in the long term, make it worse. I mean, cannabis is associated, as the professor said, with increased risk of mental health problems, including depression and psychosis. So, I think that's a belief that is wrong in the long term. What do you think the government needs to do to change that, though? I think also, as the professor said, I think they need to raise public awareness around the harms associated with cannabis. I think we maybe need to look at public health initiatives that target specifically youth.
And so when you have, we've seen Māori leaders sort of address the issue of pee from the Marae. Do you think that needs to happen with marijuana?
I think that would be a good place to start. Yeah, I mean, you look at tobacco and all the public health, that's been all the work that's been done around that, and it's seen the tobacco has reduced. So I think something along those lines needs to be, put in place. There's evidence that as tobacco, use has reduced, that the young people are starting to smoke cannabis more because they think it's a safer option, and at a younger age. So, yeah.
That must be a worry.
It's a very big worry, and I don't think that the seriousness of the health effects have yet to be seen. Not only are they smoking it at a younger age, but they're smoking much stronger pot. So there's potentially going to be a huge health, harm to people's health in the future.
How long do you think it will take to actually have a generational shift that this is actually a bad thing?
I think it could happen reasonably quickly if people if it was done correctly and the public were made aware. I think that's difficult. Depends on how the government or how everybody perceives it, how much harm they believe it's doing.
Indeed, I guess it's all about the funding and looking at it. Thank you very much, Dr. MacFarlane. Kia ora. The government response to the proposed drug law changes has been almost non-existent, so we may have to wait till after the election to see any progress on that front. Scotty.